So there was a cluster of questions at the back. I'm going to take those. Okay, I'll give you a chance. The guy at the very back.
I'd like to take up this idea of limits to growth. At first, I mean, there seems to be a little bit of a groundswell and sort of like sympathy with this idea. It seems it's pretty obvious that there's only so much of the planet to go around, and therefore there must be limits to growth. But I'd like to take issue with that. A few hundred years ago, we were busy building ships. We were building ships for vast armadas. We cut down all the forests, and now they're all gone. And we still build ships, because we build ships out of steel. And a few years ago, 30, 40 years ago, the internet was conceived. And if the internet was conceived in its modern form, with the technology of the time, we'd have wired it all with copper wire. And there wouldn't have been enough copper wire on the entire planet. But we didn't. Technology changed, and we used glass, and we used radio waves. And glass is sand, the most bountiful thing on the planet. I mean, there's sand everywhere, right? We haven't raped the planet. We haven't destroyed the fields. That is something that goes on in the third world. In this country, we use fertilisers, which are artificially produced, and we cosset the land. And some of it we set aside. In fact, we have so much farmland that we don't know what to do with most of it, and we pay farmers not to produce. But if you look at the history of the environmentalists, on every single prediction over the last 30 years, they've been wrong. They've been wrong about global cooling in the 70s. They've been wrong about us running out of oil. They've been wrong about acid rain. They've been wrong about the hole in the ozone layer. What have they been right about?
Okay, thank you. We're going to sort of wend our way forward. There was a question over on the far right there. And then I'll come through there.
Hi, I have a question for Jonathan. There were two things that you said, one of which I wholeheartedly agreed with, and one of which I thought might instinctively be right. But when I put the two together, I ended up with a little bit of contradiction, which makes me end up agreeing more with Daniel. So this is what I want to put to you. You said earlier that poverty is an issue we all need to care about, but that actually focuses on the distribution of wealth and the unfair distribution of wealth, and that the economic and political elite have been focused on taking the lion's share of that wealth for themselves. We know this, liberal democratic governments that emerged with capitalism, it's always been about preserving the wealth for the few. You later said, this is a bit, I think, instinctively could be true, that there are limits to the fertility of the natural world to continually supply us as human beings with what we need for a high quality of life, and that is why governments are now taking this issue very seriously and taking it on board. But my question is this: has the economic and political elite of this world suddenly had some kind of revelation in conscience? Have they suddenly become nice people? Do they not want the lion's share anymore for themselves? I kind of put it to you that the environmental movement, or the hijacking of the environmental agenda by the economic and political elite, is exactly what Daniel said it is. It's about preserving the lion's share of the wealth for the few.
Okay, thank you. And this guy in the green shirt there.
Hey there. I'd like to just make a point that one part of the green movement's been hammering quite a bit recently, and get a little more specific perhaps about our resources. We talk about oil. I've already heard this evening the idea that oil isn't the problem, it's not a finite resource. Excuse me, I'm an environmentalist, but I don't stand alone on this one. We're using the science of organisations such as the Association for the Study of Peak Oil, whose leadership are people who are geologists who've come out of working for oil companies. They are people who are thoroughly aware of the limitations of oil as a resource. When we're talking about wealth, we're talking about wealth created in the last 150 odd years on carbon-based resources which have been burnt and are being released into our atmosphere. It doesn't go away, it doesn't go nowhere. It hovers around in our atmosphere and it creates a problem of climate change. These two things are closely linked. So when we're talking about finite resources or not finite resources, listen to the people who know about the field of oil. Yes, there are other resources. And yes, the sun is a fantastic resource. And yes, the wind on our planet is a fantastic resource. However, we're still very much a carbon-based, resource-using society, polluting the air that it breathes, creating a climate change problem, heading towards releasing vast amounts of methane over which we will have very little control if our temperatures do get above those 2 degrees. So I'm seriously concerned. And I don't regard myself as an elitist to say I make attempts myself to reduce my impact on the planet by using green technologies and by increasingly moving into a situation where I hope I'm consuming less of resources. I may have some stuff, I do have some stuff, and I appreciate that. But I think it's very important we look at how we get our stuff, and very important that we think about the future of our planet and those resources which are not going to be there in the longer term, that we are in a period of adjustment. And no one's talked about really a period of adjustment to a time when we're going to have less of some of these things. What are we going to have to sustain ourselves, perhaps at a lower level of population, perhaps not, I don't know. But I do think it's important that each one of us addresses this issue.
Okay, thank you. The guy next to you.
I would just like to add the element that you seem to be discussing the debate between qualitative or intensive growth versus quantitative and extensive growth in relationship to fixed natural resources, which I take as a scientific given. There are such fixed resources. But no one has addressed the underlying definition of growth in the false economic paradigm that currently exists. That Herman Daly, as you know, has critiqued that the fact that our accounting system, our costing system, and our existing economic paradigm, the dominant one, and how it defines growth, is false. And until we have a paradigmatic revolution of that profound nature and how we understand the economy itself and how all the quantities in the economy are measured in the real existing biospheric limits of this planet, then we will face a crisis. We will face the limits to growth. So I wanted you to address, if you could, Herman Daly's ideas and his call for a profound paradigmatic revolution in economics as a science itself, and therefore the underlying definition of growth.
Okay, thank you. I'll come to you later. I'll come back. We're going to bring the panel in.